Still with me, let me bring in my guest, federal executive clemency attorney Tammy Allison and criminal defense attorney David Bruno. And Tammy, I'll start with you. This is a case with no body, but a very clear theory by the state of how this death happened. As a matter of fact, a large part of their case is going to be bringing in folks who had experienced the same thing they said that Paul Flores did to Kristin Smart, excuse me, but there is no body. Do you think that's more important in this case than it would be in any other?
Yes, I do think it's so important in this case because of the fact that it's so old. Like, the evidence they have is all circumstantial. So any type of evidence that they have that is tying the defendant to where this deceased was is going to be extremely important, because defense attorneys can raise doubt in any number of ways. They can say an alien came down and got her. Like, at this point, because of the fact that they are relying so heavily on the circumstantial evidence and the evidence from other people's testimony, but they don't really have anything specifically tying this individual defendant to the disappearance of Kristin Smart.
You know, David, I'm struggling with some of the evidence that's being allowed in against Paul Flores in the murder case. The theory of the state is that he drugged her, raped her, and then killed her. There are going to be women coming in, because they're allowed to bring it in under these circumstances, women who claim he did the similar thing to them, of course without the murder part, but he drugged them and then raped them. He was never charged with those crimes, but they're going to be allowed to testify to it. It's really just a theory. There's no body, there's no evidence that he actually did this to her, but yet they're going to be allowed to testify. Boy, I'm struggling with that.
Right there with you, Michael. I mean, right there with you. Look, I mean, we should be determining whether someone's guilty on the facts of the specific incident. Now, there's a rule of evidence, and it's common. It's not just in California. It's in all the states. It's in the federal court. And it talks about bad act evidence. And there has to be such a tight similarity between the crime at issue and the other bad acts to bring it in. And there's various different criteria that has to be made. It has to be proven by a clear and convincing. It has to be very close and similar. And we want our juries to get evidence based on the crime itself. And this is my concern too. It's like, this is 96. Let's compare it to the Murdoch case that we covered last segment, where they have GPS monitoring, they have text messages, they have cell towers. They have none of that here. Yeah. This is 1996. It's a circumstantial case. And there's not a sliver of evidence that the prosecutor could prove that this individual was drugged and later killed. Exactly. So there you go. You got one thing that's different. I think the biggest thing there. Also, like you said, the other victims, they weren't killed, right? So there's not a murder, and you can't prove that the victim in this case was drugged. I have big problems with bringing this evidence in light of the circumstantial nature of the evidence, the lack of evidence. And once you bring those other victims in, it's going to be a very, very difficult case for the defendant.
Absolutely. I think this shifts things so against the defendant. Boy, it's so prejudicial. Tammy, I got to get you to ring in on this. The only real evidence that, as far as I'm concerned, that I know of at the moment that the state has on this is that they're going to bring someone in to say that they met up with Kristin the night she was killed. She seemed disoriented, but they didn't smell any alcohol. And they want the jury to assume that that means somehow someone, Paul Flores, drugged her. I mean, I'm struggling with it.
It's very prejudicial, Michael. Like, it's not okay. And if we start doing things like this in this case, just so that, you know, it's a horrific situation to have a child that disappears. And, you know, any family would want closure. But you can't just do whatever to bring that closure for her family. And pretty much, you know, you're being very prejudicial, and there is room for so much more bias to enter in other types of cases if we allow this to happen in this case, where individuals are being tried based off of the circumstantial evidence that is not even related. As we said, a lot of these people that are going to come in and testify, they weren't murdered, and they allegedly were drugged and raped, but not one of them called the police. There's not a police report, anything. It's very odd.
Yeah, it is odd. And in fact, the police investigated a couple of them, but decided not to bring charges. So we'll have to see what the defense does with all that. All right, guys, stand by. We're going to take a quick break. Coming up next.